Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we are going to be discussing the massive crisis unfolding in West Africa. Now, this has been a story that's been developing for well over a week at this point, and I intended on covering it several days ago, but as time went on, and we kind of, I guess, inched closer to this deadline that was set up by ECOWAS that we'll discuss in a second, I kind of wanted to wait and see what exactly was going to come of everything before talking, and now that this deadline has passed, and I guess the time to see if ECOWAS is serious about their threats is kind of here, you know, now I feel like it may be a little bit more appropriate to talk about. So if you haven't really seen in the news recently, there's been a massive situation unfolding in West Africa. Now, in general, the African continent has been no stranger to wars and economic strife, a lot of political tension, military coups, things like that we'll be discussing in this video, but this is a situation that, if it unfolds, could technically involve the United States and other Western nations, primarily France. I mean, as of right now, the US and France are the two Western nations that are most involved. And even then, they're not really involved to a massive degree, but even then, to pretend that they're not involved to some degree would just be honestly very dishonest, and it would also be, I feel like, also pretty irresponsible too, because I mean, a lot of this situation and the way that it's unfolded has had to do with the historical tensions between Africa and the West, especially countries like the US and France. I mean, this is a continent that even in the last 100 years has been subject to massive amounts of colonialism and had a lot of issues with Europe and its allies with things like that, right? So a lot of people in Africa have pretty negative opinions of the West, and I mean, you can't blame them to most extents. I mean, like I said, if you lived in a country where historically you've been oppressed by a country like France, you'd probably be pretty pissed at them too. But this is all really kind of revolving around the issue of military coups. Now, like I said, these have been nothing new in Africa. Governments in Africa have been traditionally extremely unstable. They're very prone to uprisings and military coups like what we saw. So this is all really surrounding 15 countries in West Africa, primarily a massive bloc known as ECOWAS. Now, ECOWAS is like an economic alliance of West African nations. It's almost like a European Union, if you will, right? Where it's basically a big group of African countries who they're trying to work together diplomatically, very closely politically, and they're trying to tie in and build their economies together to help the entire continent of Africa, and more particularly West Africa, really kind of help thrive and prosper, right? So it's an organization that is supposed to be doing a lot of good, but unfortunately ECOWAS has, in the last few days, made a pretty stark threat towards Niger, which is a country in West Africa that just a few days ago saw a military coup. Now, this military coup was the 7th military coup in Western Africa in the last 3 years alone. And notably, another few countries that we'll be talking about in this video, Mali and Burkina Faso, they're two countries that have been subject to military coups in the last few years, and they are still under control of these military coups. Now, all these countries are part of ECOWAS, which, like I said, is a 15-nation bloc of West African nations that are trying to get ahead in society. They're trying to build up their economies. Now, obviously, military coups are not good for economies. Usually, the new, military dictators really kind of crack down on the country and start really being, overprotective. That way, they can kind of restore their own personal rule over things, right? And ECOWAS has been a group of nations that's been hit particularly hard by military coups in the last few years. So ECOWAS as a group finally kind of said, fuck it, we've had enough, right? Because a couple days ago, the military, or a military faction in Niger, overthrew the democratically elected government of the country and detained the president in the presidential palace and assumed full control of Niger. Now, once again, ECOWAS has been dealing with this issue for a while, and they kind of got fucking sick of it, right? So they announced that if the democratically elected government in Niger was not restored, that they would possibly intervene in Niger with military action, which would mean that countries like Nigeria Liberia, Senegal, Cape Verde, Togo, Ghana. These countries may all end up using their military forces to intervene inside of Niger in essentially what would be an invasion to oust the military coup and restore order. Now, ECOWAS is supported by France and the United States. Now, France has a pretty massive reason to be involved in this whole Niger conflict. Actually, I believe the country name is pronounced Niger. I've always heard it pronounced as Niger, but Niger, that's what I'll pronounce it as, I guess. So Niger actually has provided France with a lot of uranium and other natural resources that France uses in their economy and in their society. This, once again, this has been pretty typical of Africa over like the last century. A lot of their resources and natural goods have been used by the West, and then now you have like China with their big initiative. They're coming into Africa, they're investing in infrastructure and whatnot so they can get their piece of the pie too, right? And so Niger has gotten to this point where France and the US have military assets and whatnot in the country. And the new military coup is not too friendly with the West. They don't really give a fuck about France. They don't care about the US. They seem a little bit more aligned with like Russia and more particularly Wagner Group, who has reportedly deployed their troops to Niger and would help protect the country against an ECOWAS invasion to oust the military coup. And so Niger has now basically openly told France to go fuck themselves and have basically cut their communications and whatnot with France and have told them to just kind of get the fuck out of the country if they don't like it. And the US, it seems like for now, it's kind of like trying to play, you know, the diplomatic role. They're just kind of like, fuck it, we'll let ECOWAS handle it, right? They're the folks in the area or whatever. Now, I doubt that the US is going to allow anything to happen that would go against their national security interests. So the moment that US forces get fired upon, you know, US civilians, anything like that, shit could go south real quick. And I mean, it's not like the United States has this history of being some country that just doesn't get involved, right? The West will be involved to a certain extent. I hate to say that. I don't want American troops involved or anything like that, and I don't think it'll get to that point. But to say the US wouldn't logistically help with an invasion or they wouldn't provide intelligence to ECOWAS and whatnot, I just don't believe that, right? So ECOWAS, their deadline to basically oust the military coup is over, like it's passed. So they are now convening for a second emergency meeting immediately in the capital of Nigeria, apparently to discuss what they're gonna do next. Like I said, a few days ago, they were saying if they got to this point, they might militarily intervene, and we're to that point now, so we're going to see if ECOWAS is really about it, and if they're really going to try and oust this, fucking military coup, right? So, unfortunately for ECOWAS, though, there is some infighting, because countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, these are countries that have seen military coups in recent years, right? And for them, like, they're not going to sit there and support, like, the military coup in Niger getting tore down. They're military coups themselves. So if ECOWAS can go in there and clear out the military coup in Niger, they can do the same thing in Burkina Faso and in these other countries too, right? So these countries have actually fractured from ECOWAS and have went against all the other nation states, claiming that they will militarily defend the country of Niger, who is now under a military coup. Meaning that ECOWAS now has multiple member states pledging the defense of this breakaway state that they're all getting ready to gang up and potentially invade. So for instance, imagine like the EU had an issue where, like, I don't know, fucking Spain and France had military coups, right? And all these EU countries were like, nah, fuck that, we're coming in, we're gonna go deal with that, right? If you guys don't stop, we're coming in. And then all of a sudden, Poland and Scandinavia were all like, oh hey, fuck you guys actually. If you guys invade, we're coming to their military defense. It would be a complete shit show, right? Well, that's exactly what's going on in West Africa. And these countries that are, dealing with these military coups, they're finding themselves much more aligned with political states like Russia. And we've seen a lot of videos on Twitter in the last few days of the capital of Niger where thousands of protesters have actually come out in support of the Nigerian military coup that is controlling the country. And they're waving Russian flags and, denouncing the West. But at the same time, there's also thousands of protesters who've taken to the streets in support of the detained president that was democratically elected. There's a pretty good split on opinion inside of Niger, and as of right now, no one really knows what the next step from ECOWAS is. Are these countries going to invade, and will we see a massive African war break out? No one really knows. But but it could happen pretty much any minute. I mean, these countries already said that was what could happen, and we're at that point now, right? And I mean, these countries that are subject to these military coups, right? Like, they're not just going away. It's not like these, military dictators are just going to step away. So it's going to end up in something, right? Like, there's got to be some sort of action taken, because if you're ECOWAS at this point, right, all of these countries in your union are falling subject to military coups. Their governments are breaking down. They're becoming much more authoritarian. The economic benefits are a lot worse. All this does is contribute, in their eyes, to even more regional political instability. And in Africa, that political regional instability is the constant issue that's been holding the continent back. I mean, so many of the countries in Africa can't keep a stable government, and they, for that reason, can't really very adequately address the needs of the people there, right? I mean, we've seen for decades in Africa how poverty and hunger and, illnesses have all been massive concerns. That's because they don't have government structures there like we do in a lot of other developed places in the world. They don't have enough hospitals stocked with enough, high-tech quality, technology and medicines that will help treat people and their issues. They don't have an economy that pays people good wages and allows them to, better their lives and their families' lives. They don't, in a lot of places, have accessible quality education to further their abilities and, give them skills. In a lot of places, they're under the control of military coups, and if they're not under the control of them, they're dealing with terrorist organizations and, paramilitary organizations that are committing genocides and killing civilians and all kinds of horrible, just terrible shit, right? So, in the eyes of ECOWAS, this is their opportunity to help provide some stability to the region. But at the same time, it could destabilize the whole region and get the West and these other massive political powers even more entangled in Africa, which to them has been an issue traditionally viewed as something that they want to get away from, right? So it's a really shitty situation, and either way, a lot of innocent people are going to be subject to some pretty terrible shit. I mean, if war doesn't break out, these military, controllers, they're not known for, their love for liberty and safety for people. I mean, they rule with an iron fist in a lot of these areas around the world. And then if war breaks out and they try to restabilize the region that way, I mean, people are going to die. Infrastructure that already is underdeveloped is going to be destroyed, and, it's going to set these countries back even further. It's honestly just a really terrible situation to watch, but it is one of global significance that needs to be watched. So as updates come to this story, I do plan to continue updating you guys with videos right here on the channel. So with that being said, though, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubTheOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. Thank you to my Watch Optimus subscribers. Your support helps the channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, my voice cracking and talking about Africa, war, and signing out.